Hello and welcome to this lecture on surveys and questionnaires. After this lecture, students should be able to understand the strengths and weaknesses of surveys and evaluate the appropriateness of different types of survey designs. Surveys are a type of data collection where the respondents, or the people or participants in the survey, complete a question or interview where they self-report or describe their own characteristics. Most questionnaires and structured interviews are what we call structured or semi-structured. Structured surveys have a fixed set of questions that are asked in a fixed order with fixed transitions from one question to the next and one topic to the next. This is useful because it means that every respondent is going to get the same set of questions in the same order, and we can then compare results from one respondent to the next. However, this is very rigid and does not allow us to adapt our survey to respondents with different needs. Semi-structured surveys attempt to address this by creating a fixed set of questions, but allow the person giving the interview or giving the survey to adapt the questions and the order of questions to the respondent. This allows some flexibility in the questions asked while still giving some structure to the survey and allowing that comparison. The downside with semi-structured surveys is we have to use in-person interviews or over-the-phone interviews in order to conduct them. This makes semi-structured surveys a little bit more expensive than structured surveys, typically. When we're creating a survey, the first thing we need to do is determine our target population, our sampling frame, or how we're going to sample from that target population, and our sampling method. Then we need to decide what type of survey we're going to do. Are we going to do a questionnaire, or are we going to do some sort of interview? Are we going to do structured or semi-structured? Are we going to do cross-sectional, get information from our sample at one point in time, or are we going to try to do some sort of longitudinal study where we go back to our target population or sample multiple times? Then we need to choose a survey instrument, such as in-person interviews, over-the-phone interviews, a computer questionnaire, or a mail-in questionnaire, or some combination of those instruments. And we need to design appropriate questions for our population, decide on the survey layout and flow, and as always, pre-test our survey. So let's talk about the different types of survey instrumentation. When we say survey instrumentation, we're talking about how we're going to get the survey to our respondents and get the information back. The first type of survey is a face-to-face interview survey. This is where interviews are given face-to-face by trained interviewers. This usually increases our response rate, but also increases our chances of bias. It does allow us to do semi-structured or structured interviews and surveys with the added cost of having to train people and put them out into the field, which, is going to make it more expensive. Next is telephone interviews. Telephone interviews are given obviously over the phone by trained interviewers. Again, we're going to have that added cost of training people and having people work to send these out. On the plus side, it is relatively cheap and easy to randomize telephone surveys. You can use a random digit dialer to randomly call numbers, so it's a really easy way of randomizing. However, there are issues with response rates, trust, and coverage. I know many people don't answer their phone if they don't recognize the number, that sort of thing. Both face-to-face and telephone surveys allow us to do structured or semi-structured interviews, and both face-to-face and telephone surveys are going to be slightly more expensive than the next type of survey instrumentation. The next couple types of survey instrumentation are computer and pencil and paper surveys. Unlike telephone or face-to-face surveys, we can only do structured surveys with computer and pencil and paper. We cannot adapt our survey with computers and pencil and paper to the needs of our respondents. Everybody's going to get the same questions in the same order every single time. This makes these relatively cheap to do. So for example, in a computer survey, a questionnaire is sent out via email or there's a link posted, and it is very cheap. We can send it to 1,000 people really easily, but it has poor coverage, response rates, and little quality control. The downside here is most people are going to ignore our email. They're not going to click on our link. We don't know if people are understanding our survey. We're not getting any feedback like, oh, I didn't understand that question. If they don't understand it, they may not answer it correctly, and we would never know. And people in general just aren't going to take it. Pencil and paper questionnaires are mailed out to respondents. So it's actually going to be a physical copy. You're going to have to bubble in dots or circle things, right? It has a much lower response rate, but is, again, very cheap. It's more flexible for respondents. They can start it, put it down, come back to it later. But again, we don't really have any control if they don't understand a question or if they fail to return it. One of the downsides of this is that people may start the survey at home and then just forget about it. So we have to worry about that. Frequently, we do what is called mixed mode surveys. This is where we combine one or more types of instrumentation. So we might do computer and telephone surveys in order to reach more people and get better coverage. We might do questionnaires that will allow us to select certain people for more in-depth interviews, either face-to-face or over the phone. And so we can combine these different types of instrumentation to get better coverage or to get more in-depth information and select people who we want to get that information from. So surveys in general are very flexible in that we can do both descriptive and explanatory research. So we can look at sort of causal relationships, but we can also just get general information. It allows for what is called secondary analysis. Secondary analysis means that after we have collected our data, we can give that data to other people to analyze as well. The downside here is it is hard for us to tell if our independent variable is the cause of our dependent variable. It is hard to eliminate those extraneous or competing variables. Thus, we tend to have weak internal validity with surveys. On the plus side, it's easy to use random sampling with surveys, and so we can have increased external validity with surveys if we do them right. We also can get concerns with reactive measurement in that, especially with face-to-face and telephone surveys, people are going to be reacting to us asking them questions. There's going to be a desire from the respondent to answer in a way that is going to make them look good. So there may be some issues with honesty or people saying what they think that the interviewer wants to hear. All right, that's all for this lecture. Thank you for watching.